After Brexit, is it time for Frexit? Or is this the French presidential candidate to unite Europe? And how hard a time would he give Britain on its way out? Good evening. He's never been elected to political office. He doesn't lead an established political party, and he styles himself as the outsider candidate in a presidential election. Does that sound familiar? Well, that's where Emmanuel Macron parts company with Donald Trump. He's unfashionably, perhaps, a centrist. His candidacy is gaining traction. But can he mobilise the voters in a world where populism has trumped politics? In his first major British interview since he declared he was running for the French presidency, we talked to Emmanuel Macron about what he'd do and the implications for Europe and for us.
If your government decides to organise a Brexit, I will be pretty tough on it, because I think it cannot
be tough on it.
Yes, because we have to preserve the rest of the European Union.
Also tonight, a popular, charismatic hero in the White House visiting Donald Trump. Canada's Justin Trudeau arrives as the president is under pressure over the conduct of his national security advisor and his overtures to Russia. Why shops are up in arms over rising business rates. The author, Jeanette Winterson, who also has a shop where oranges are not the only fruit, debates why people are threatened with closing down. And the extraordinary story of Wad al-Khatib, the woman who filmed inside East Aleppo for this programme, documenting the toll of a complex war on ordinary lives. I've been to see her.
In the last month, when Sama was about 6 months, many times the hospital was targeted.
And later in the programme, it may be more than 20 years ago, but the O.J. Simpson trial continues to fascinate. We talked to the filmmaker nominated for an Oscar for a new documentary which raises issues of race and celebrity which surrounded the case and the man himself. So where Donald Trump wanted to hold Theresa May's hand, the front-runner in France's presidential election race promises, I will be pretty tough on the British government. In his first UK television interview since he came to the fore, Emmanuel Macron says that if Britain leaves the EU, we can be certain he won't soften. No access to the single market, no matter what. Our Europe editor, Matt Fry, spent a day with the former banker who's rapidly emerging as the main challenger to the far-right National Front leader, Marine Le Pen.
The smartphone has transformed politics in France too. Every moment is now a photo op. The smile has to stay on, permanently. Emmanuel Macron is saved by the train. His newfangled party is called En Marche, or On Our Way. But where to? All the way to the Élysée Palace? Heading left, right, or down the middle? For now, his destination is Tours in the Loire Valley, where he hopes to harvest new voters.
Okay. Happy with that? It was good,
Yes,
huh?
yeah,
Lots of people.
We've come to find out what's behind the smile and why this 39-year-old former banker on a selfie marathon could well be France's next president. First things first, the book signing in a supermarket at lunchtime. The tome is called Revolution, not exactly light reading. But France still adores intellect. He's a fan too, and Macron embodies the fight back of the metropolitan elite.
Your book is called Revolution.
Yeah.
You don't look like a revolutionary. You know, you worked for Rothschild's bank before, you were a financier, you were economics minister, you were briefly a member of the Socialist Party. You're not a revolutionary, are you?
No, but normal people now has to deliver a new revolution, a democratic revolution. I don't claim to be a revolutionary as a French sans-culotte,
Mm-hmm. You're not Robespierre.
or somebody claiming, yes, nobody is actually somebody in charge of a revolution in this country. That's pure bull. But what's important, why I call it revolution? Because we are living a revolution, de facto.
But it's to the right more than to the left, or to the centre. It's certainly not a revolution
we are living
for the centre.
All of us, your country lived a revolution. I mean,
But it headed in the wrong direction as far as you're concerned.
as far as I'm concerned, but my point is that we are in a period of radical change.
The insurgent momentum has been on the side of the right. Trump in America.
You're right.
Le Pen, they're doing very well in the polls here. She's still ahead of you in the polls in this country.
You're right.
The AFD in Germany, Brexit.
You're right.
So how will you buck that trend? How will you go against that?
By fighting.
And this is who he's up against, Marine Le Pen, the candidate of the far right, anti-immigration, anti-Euro, anti-liberal, and hoping to ride the Brexit and Trump wave all the way to the presidency. She was on the beach in Nice today, close to where an Islamic extremist killed more than 80 people with his lorry last summer. Her message: make France great again.
If she is the next president of France, Marine Le Pen, what happens to the future of Europe?
I mean, if she delivers what she proposed, she will kill the European Union.
She will kill the European Union.
But de facto, because she wants to diverge on immigration, on economy, finance.
She wants a referendum on the euro, but not on the EU. So
No,
it
but
wouldn't be
de
another
facto,
Brexit
if she
referendum.
wants to implement what she proposes on the European Union, she will leave. She will kill the single market because it's not compatible with the single market.
Right. And you want to see more Europe. You want to see Europe become more united.
I want to see Europe becoming more united,
But not a United States of Europe?
more powerful at 27 tomorrow or 28 today.
Which brings us to the next stop and the next subject. The Loire Valley is the kind of place favoured by British expats. About 200,000 live in France. So what about Brexit?
If your government decides to organize a Brexit, I will be pretty tough on it because I think it cannot
You'll be tough on it?
Yes, because we have to preserve the rest of the European Union and not to convey the message that you can decide to leave without any consequence.
So Britain should be punished for its decision?
No, it's not to be punished, but to be consistent with such a decision. You don't get the passport and you don't get access to the single market when you decide to leave.
Next, his private life. Unusually, this has fascinated the French electorate. Mr. and Mrs. Macron have been on the cover of Paris Match 4 times. He married his high school crush, Brigitte, except the high school crush was also his drama teacher.
If you look at the cover of Paris Match and various other journals, the picture that you see more often than not is you and your wife, who is famously 24 years older than you. 24 or 25?
24.
24, okay. So can your message, your very nuanced message, go beyond that image? Because that is the image that a lot of ordinary French people have in their mind.
I thought first that you don't choose to get this image. Why are you at the front page of this magazine? Because they sell with this image. I'm lucid.
Does that bother you? Does it bother you?
The day, for sure. It's just they want to sell their paper. I'm sorry, but that's it. So I don't want to be the victim of such a system. I don't blame it. But
it also makes you better known, doesn't it?
Yes, for sure.
Okay. There are a lot of rumors on the internet. You know, we know that cyber hackers have intervened in various elections. Are you worried about interference from outside, especially from Russian hackers?
I do because I do experience these attacks. Every day I have dozens of attacks coming from these countries. They are part of those who conveyed crazy rumors about my life and so on. They claim that I was homosexual, which is not a shame in itself. But I am married and I love my wife. So honestly, it's not pleasant for my wife and myself. But that's what they want to push. And they interfere.
Why do they want to push that rumor? French society doesn't care about these things that much. Why would they want to do that?
I think because they want to push a message that I'm a liar. I have a double life. That's a motto. That's what they want to push. And they
and
push.
You don't?
No, I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for that. It's not typically a French politician life, but I'm probably not a typical French politician.
Never before elected to office, a political insurgent who channels optimism, not anger, and wants more, not less Europe. The revenge of the liberal elite or its last stand.
Well, that other self-styled outsider who made it to president, Donald Trump, is finding life in power tougher than perhaps he expected. After the court's rejection of his migrant travel ban, now he's facing criticism of his national security advisor, Mike Flynn, who's been accused of inappropriate relations with Russia and Turkey. Today, Mr. Trump has been welcoming the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, to the White House. But even that's turning out to be less straightforward than might have been expected. Kylie Morris joins us from Washington. Kylie.
Krish, that joint press conference is just about to begin between Prime Minister Trudeau and President Trump. But I think there are concerns that certainly we won't see the kind of cosy bonhomie that we saw between Prime Minister Trudeau and President Obama. These two now have very great political differences. They differ on immigration, on the environment, on trade. So it will be interesting to see what they have to say about that. President Trump says that he's keeping so busy with foreign leaders this week, he doesn't have time to focus on the future of Mike Flynn, his national security advisor, who you mentioned. I'm sure Mike Flynn is focusing very much on his future today, though. Again, these accusations that he talked to the Russians about sanctions after the inauguration before President Trump after the election, before President Trump was inaugurated. The concern is that he made some suggestion about a softening of sanctions. Now, he has in the past denied that, although now he seems to be suggesting he can't quite recall. He's not absolutely certain. The Democrats, though, are certain. They would like to see him fired. So potentially rocky days ahead for Mike Flynn. But first, let's look at this latest episode in the foreign policy adventures of Donald Trump, that meeting today with Justin Trudeau.
You get worried when they don't want to take your picture.
You get worried when they don't want to take your picture, joked the youthful Prime Minister. The vainglorious president smiled. Not getting enough attention is not currently among Donald Trump's problems. His rollercoaster ride since inauguration means even the visit of a northern neighbour with whom the US shares warm relations holds potential for drama.
In a cruel and unforgiving world in which the options are bad, in which it's easy to stumble in, knowingly or otherwise, into an escalatory cycle that could lead to a serious crisis, you need to be patient. You need to exercise impulse control. You can't turn every conversation with a foreign leader into a test of wills.
The president returned to Washington late last night after facing another foreign policy test, a lonely walk to the White House, in contrast to his weekend socialising with the Japanese Prime Minister at his Florida resort Mar-a-Lago. Their wives chatted and their parties ate dinner together. But when North Korea launched a ballistic missile, it was time to clear away the plates and get down to business. Other diners at the private members club found themselves front row for an international crisis. On the balcony, aides used their mobile phones to cast light on the scene. The leaders made a joint statement for the media, and they gatecrashed a wedding reception at the resort.
Today, I said to the Prime Minister of Japan, I said, come on, Simpson, let's go over and say hello.
While he was on the campaign, President Trump hinted at a Mar-a-Lago experience for North Korea's Kim Jong-un. Of course he'd have him over and do a deal.
Who the hell cares? I'll speak to anybody.
Talk him out of nukes.
Who knows? There's a 10% or a 20% chance that I can talk him out of those damn nukes, because who the hell wants him to have nukes?
In the real world, the US needs China's help to talk to North Korea. President Xi had frozen out Trump over his threats to undo the One China policy until last week, when President Trump flipped. There are also signs that he's shifting on his key promises on Israel.
You're beginning to see a sort of shift toward a more disciplined, responsible reaction. And we saw it on the Arab-Israeli issue, where the president is already tacking. He's slow-walking any thought of moving the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. They issued a settlement statement last week, which frankly would have been acceptable to most of his predecessors. So I'm not arguing that this is a transformation in Donald Trump. People don't change at the age of 70. The question is whether or not they're learning.
He'll have to learn fast. Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, is due in Washington on Wednesday. So I think there are real questions being asked here today about sort of the Mar-a-Lago approach to foreign policy, that President Trump is taking an approach which is very personal, but very much built about his own kind of impromptu reactions to people and to situations. There were some people who were at that Mar-a-Lago for dinner at the weekend who saw what was happening and thought it was great and thought that, well, that's President Trump being President Trump. He's being very spontaneous. He's a man of the people. But I think there are also concerns that he perhaps isn't paying attention to the many good advisors that he has now assembled around him and isn't perhaps taking into account the complexity of the situation that he faces.
Kylie Morris.
Well, now we're joined from Washington by David Frum. He describes himself as a conservative Republican and was a speechwriter for President George W. Bush, but says he voted for Hillary Clinton in last year's presidential election. He's now a senior editor at The Atlantic magazine, where you have written an amazing and very tough piece about what life might be like with a re-elected Trump in 4 years' time and much else. And I'm just wondering, first of all, Michael Flynn, would your president have sacked him?
It's inconceivable that George W. Bush would have had someone like Michael Flynn on his staff in the first place. Michael Flynn, after being fired as head of the Defense Intelligence Agency for mismanagement, accepted paid engagements from Russian state propaganda TV. He sat at a table with Vladimir Putin and led a standing ovation to Vladimir Putin. No, I don't think you would have found someone with that kind of background working for George W. Bush.
But amid the myriad of performances that Mr. Trump has been able to enter into the annals of the first 3 weeks of his presidency, this is merely one of a number of interesting moments.
No, this is one of the two most sinister things that are going on. I've often observed in writing about the Trump presidency that the controversies will distract you from the scandals. So while every day there is a controversy, just the other day, Donald Trump reading highly classified documents in front of the paying customers at Mar-a-Lago and having cell phones used to illuminate the documents, which could be hacked by foreign spies. The two drivers are foreign interference in the American election and Donald Trump's use of the presidency for self-enrichment. Those are the two big stories, and Michael Flynn is at the center of one of them.
But David Frum, as I said in the beginning, you're a Republican, or you were, and a fairly staunch one, and to the right of the party probably. But what I think everybody is wondering is how many other Republicans will be thinking like you? In particular, the leader of the Republican Party in the Senate, and indeed many other key Republicans in the House. How are they thinking, and will they desert him?
Well, there are a lot of Republicans who are extremely worried about one or another of the things Donald Trump is doing, in particular his protectionism and his damage to the Western alliance. But there's no question that Donald Trump has a hold over the membership of the Republican Party. And when Republicans in Congress have tangled with Donald Trump in the past, they have lost. Paul Ryan had some spectacular tangles with Donald Trump during the campaign and found that his approval rating in his own constituency would drop by 24 points within the space of a week. Trump controls American politics by controlling within the Republican Party. He's an unpopular president, but he's a strong party leader.
Well, what then do you foresee him surviving all this and doing rather well, and in fact maintaining his hold on the 62 million people who voted for him, that indeed the working people of America will stick by him whatever happens?
Well, the article you're kindly alluding to opens with a fictitious scenario about how Donald Trump might be reelected. But then the gist of it is to deal with the ways in which traditional freedoms and institutions are being steadily corroded under Donald Trump, and the lines that we're on now and where they go. That is a real risk, and it's not a certainty. It's not something that must happen, but it is something that can happen unless people mobilize to stop it.
Well, let's just take a quick look, forgive us for a moment, dipping away to the White House, where the aforementioned President Trump is already speaking.
Of our many shared interests. This includes a stronger trading relationship between the United States and Canada. It includes safe, efficient, and responsible cross-border travel and migration. And it includes close partnership on domestic and international security.
Well, that's interesting, David Frum, because it's completely conventional presidential speak in the presence of a visiting dignitary. He's learnt something in the first 3 weeks.
Well, I don't know that he will do it again tomorrow. What is going on here with the Canadian visit, this is a gigantic trading relationship between the United States and Canada, involving many, many hundreds of billions of dollars and massive economic interests on both sides of the border. This is an example where Congress has sort of stood down Donald Trump. Donald Trump actually wants a lot more protectionism. He wants protectionism against Canada. He wants to make travel more difficult. But what he's bumped up against here are Republicans in Congress who've said, do not tangle with this relationship. There are too many jobs in my district that depend on it. It's a reminder of the power they would have if they exercised it. To date, they have usually been frightened, and tomorrow they may be frightened again.
Pretty interesting, therefore, that Trudeau had the wit to get down to Washington as soon as he possibly could, and he's got Trump to say things that will have to be visited upon him if anything goes wrong.
Right, but this is a low bar. you know, obviously it's a good thing that the president not mess up the relationship with Canada the way he messed up the relationship with Australia. But there are few international relationships easier to manage than the U.S.-Canada relationship. In fact, there are no international relationships easier to manage than the U.S.-Canada relationship. So the fact that you have managed to do that, that's not a giant, you know, unless we're, unless we're grading on a very easy curve. Meanwhile, what we do have is a situation where the United States is steering toward all kinds of international confrontations under Donald Trump. Confrontation with China, for example, having first alienated Pacific allies by canceling the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and then the most militarily capable ally in the region, Australia, the president may or may not have, different stories vary, a screaming match with him on the telephone.
David Trump, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And we will return to Donald Trump if something else emerges later in the programme. Krishnan.
Now, at a time of rising international tension, it was surely an act calculated to stir up new fears. North Korea's apparently successful ballistic missile test has also succeeded in uniting America, Russia, China and Japan in condemnation. But what, if anything, can the international community do? Kieran Jenkins reports.
North Korean state TV had some breaking news for its people today, 2 days after the event. These images show the Pukguksong-2, the missile Kim Jong-un lobbed on Saturday into an increasingly uncertain world. It was accompanied by the usual volley of unrefined propaganda, wild celebrations and team photos. They claim the medium to long-range missile is capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. It's part of an escalating weapons program. Consider this a giant middle finger to the new US president.
We had a good time. We got to know each other very, very well.
It now falls to Donald Trump to contain this threat. Over dinner with the Japanese Prime Minister this weekend, he offered his steadfast support. Not quite what he'd been saying on the campaign trail.
Now, I didn't say anything about letting Japan nuke, but I did say, perhaps if we can't do the right deal, we'll have to let them take care of themselves.
Nothing like a missile launch to focus the mind. The Pukguksong-2 is an updated version of a missile that was test-fired from a submarine last year. This one was fired on the ground from a mobile launcher. It can travel further, be fired more quickly, and is harder to track by satellite. It was launched from the Pangnyeon Air Base in North Korea and travelled east for 500 kilometres before plunging into the Sea of Japan outside of Japanese waters. On the streets of Pyongyang, they learned today of the launch's complete success, North Korean style. But internationally, there are doubts that don't get expressed here. Their claim to have nuclear warheads small enough to attach to these missiles has not been verified.
After watching the Pukguksong-2 being launched, I have clearly realised how powerful our country is. I feel so powerful to know that any imperialists or US will not be able to harm our country from now on.
Last month, North Korea claimed it would soon have a missile that could reach the United States. Donald Trump said that won't happen. He's hinted previously at opening a dialogue with Kim Jong-un. Isolated and alone, North Korea continues to provoke.
Well, southeast of North Korea, at least 32 people on a border tour bus have been killed in a crash on a highway near Taiwan's capital, Taipei. 30 were pronounced dead at the scene, and 2 more died later in hospital. The fire department says that 12 people are still being treated in hospital.
In Pakistan, at least 13 people have died in a suspected suicide bomb attack on a crowd of protesters in the city of Lahore. The explosion occurred during a protest organised by Pakistan's chemists and pharmaceutical manufacturers against changes to the law on drug sales. More than 30 people were wounded in the attack. And 4 snowboarders, including 2 teenagers, have been killed in an avalanche at the alpine skiing station of Tignes in southeast France. The 4 were walking in an off-piste area near a ski lift when an avalanche was set off by skiers higher up the mountain. Local officials say they do not believe there were any other victims.
They're all well-known names in the high street, but firms including the likes of Pizza Express, Wagamama and All Bar One say they face a serious threat of having to cut jobs and close branches because of a radical revaluation of business rates. Rises of tens of thousands of pounds are due to come into effect in April, with more in the pipeline. In a moment, we'll be talking to the author Jeanette Winterson, who has her own shop in London's East End. But first, our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, has been taking the temperature on the high street.
Anthony Pender's London pub chain, Yummy Pubs, is small but growing fast. Last year they had a turnover of £5.5 million, and they've been investing in new equipment and refurbishments. But an imminent increase in the business rates he pays could signal last orders for any further plans to expand.
With our business, over the last 5 years we've been here, we've painted the exterior of the building, we've added more furniture, we've innovated and we've looked at what the market needs and we've delivered that, and we've had good results. And basically the tax is based on the results you have. Unfortunately, that stifles the very investment that made our business grow in the first place.
Anthony has 6 pubs across London. Currently he pays £109,000 in business rates a year. But as of April, that will rise to £164,000 a year, an increase of 41%.
Might you have to close one or two of your pubs, is what you're saying?
I have to be really clear, we're going to do everything we can that not to be the case, but in some areas that may be a decision that has to be taken. We may have to close venues, and I imagine across the UK this is going to be prevalent.
Business rates change every 5 years, and the last time increases were introduced was in 2010, which means the next changes were due to come into effect in 2015. But for some reason the government shelved it, many say because it would have been unpopular to have made those changes during an election campaign. Which means that for many, the increases coming into play now in 2017 are actually much higher than they would have seen just 2 years ago. And it's that has so many businesses like these worried.
The government says pubs have seen stronger sales in the last few years because more of us have been eating out. And in general, it claims 3/4 of businesses will see no change or even a fall in their rates bill come April. That's certainly true of this pet shop in Merthyr Tydfil in South Wales. It's been here since 1949, but the current owner, Chris Jones, says business in recent years has been tough.
Footfall in the town has been decreasing over a number of years now, maybe for the last 10 years. So any help in outlay, in running costs of the business, because other bills are going up, such as electricity bills, water rates, etc. So any help at this moment in time for any, I think, high street shop is a major boost.
The council has told him he could be paying less than a quarter of the roughly £7,000 a year in business rates he pays now, after a revaluation of his property found it was worth far less than in 2010.
I'm led to believe it's all for small businesses under a certain square footage of retail area. So it is a boost. It's not just to me, but to a lot of businesses in the town centre, to be honest.
And that's the problem. For every pet shop in Merthyr Tydfil, there'll be a small business in a more affluent part of the country for whom the upcoming rate change could be the kiss of death.
And just one such person joins us from Manchester, Jeanette Winterson, who, as well as being the author of, among other things, Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, is also the owner of an organic food shop in East London, where doubtless they're also not the only fruit. Thanks very much for joining us, Jeanette Winterson.
Thank you.
I mean, there's the rub. There was the pet shop owner in Merthyr Tydfil who's going to be relieved of excessive rates because his area is struggling. You, unfortunately, you have the misfortune, if you like, or perhaps the fortune, given that you're an organic deli, to be in an area where, prices are rising, market forces.
Yeah, that doesn't help the business, though, because business rates is a property tax. So it's based on the value of the property. So obviously, if you're living in the capital or anywhere where property values are rising, then you're going to see the rateable value going up a lot. That's not going to help your turnover. It's not going to help your footfall. It doesn't mean that you can bring more people in to find the money. And, you know, the problem with London in particular is that it's its own ecosystem. What we're going to see here is a kind of species wipeout. Because London property is traded on the international market. Many people who own the buildings whose rates are going to rise are not local. They don't even have any particular investment in any neighbourhood except for a financial investment. So you might be renting a shop and doing your best and suddenly find that your business rates have gone up, your landlord's doing very well, but you're out on the street. And what we're not really looking at with this tax is the 500,000 or so businesses.
But are we looking at the pet shop owner in Merthyr Tydfil? I mean, the thing is, there will be people all over the country, not in London, it's true, but London's a pretty special and blessed place, who are not doing so well and are really struggling and terribly relieved that they're going to have their business rates cut.
Yeah, that's great, and those business rates should be cut. I'm all for that. But business rates, it's not a law set in gravity. We can change the way that we do things. You know, we can say, look, we need to support and boost economies in parts of the country that are failing. But we also need to look at those places where property values have risen and are frankly out of control. Everybody knows London's out of control.
Well, I was going to bring you to that point, because at the moment it's the government that lays down the law as to what the rates are. We rang the local government association. They said, oh, no, don't talk to us. Talk to the government. This should surely be something at the core of reorganising the way things are done. I mean,
absolutely.
What is the government doing fixing your rates? What is the government doing fixing the pet shop owners' rates? This is a matter for the people who are intimately involved in running those areas wherever they are. So it would be your council that would really evaluate what you should be paying.
Yeah, but I think councils in poorer areas, and where I am, Tower Hamlets, is an area with a lot of social challenges, would naturally be thinking, well, how can we get the most out of the businesses? But in some ways that's redundant, because if you put a business out of business, then you're also throwing people out of work and you're losing the character of the neighbourhood. And we do have to think about the character of our towns and cities. What do we want them to look like? You know, do we want to have corner shops? Do we want bookshops? Do we want dry cleaners? Do we want somewhere you can get a pint of milk? If the answer is yes, we have to look at how this becomes affordable. Now, I'm fortunate. I own the building, so you could say it's all right for her. You know, over the last 20 years, she's done fine. But that doesn't interest me. I want a shop in Spitalfields that sells real things to real people. You know, I'm not interested in the international market. I'm interested in what my community and my neighbourhood looks like. And there's 500,000 other small businesses just like me, and going for species wipeout isn't intelligent.
Tell me this, is anyone listening to you? Because today we have rung, I should think, 40 people at least who we wanted to come on to talk with you. Ministers, MPs, councillors. Nobody wants to touch this thing.
Well, I hope it's not because it's me. I mean, I'm feeling a bit like an attack dog at the moment. It might be. But look, I'm hoping it means the government will do a U-turn on this. I mean, and that the Chancellor will take the opportunity in March to say the business rate is not working and we need to replace it with something else. But, you know, base it on turnover, base it on what the business can actually afford. And then you might get somewhere. Then we can keep people on our high streets. You know, Mary Portas set up a meeting with Greg Clark that I went along to. It was all very charming. He said, I'll come back to you. This was about a month ago. Unsurprisingly, we haven't heard a word.
Jeanette Winston, thank you very much indeed. Let's hope they were listening.
Thank you.
It's almost 2 months since East Aleppo was retaken by Syrian government forces, and the civilians from there have either fled to Idlib province, gone abroad, or returned to their shattered homes. It was impossible for us to enter the rebel-held East during the fighting. Channel 4 News relied on the extraordinary footage of a 26-year-old woman called Wad al-Khatib. With her baby and husband Hamza, who worked as a doctor in Aleppo, she stayed throughout the siege to document the stories of civilians and escaped when it ended. I've been talking to her about her life and work in Aleppo. To protect her family in Syria, we've hidden her identity. And a warning, this report contains images from the start you may find distressing. Wad al-Khatib filmed the agony of East Aleppo. Caught in the bombing of rebel-held territory by President Assad and his Russian allies. She told the stories of civilians, many in the emergency rooms where her husband Hamza was a doctor. With their baby daughter, Sama, they were among the last to leave when East Aleppo fell in December. They made it to Turkey, where we met to discuss Wad's own extraordinary story. When the Arab Spring erupted in 2011, Wad was a young student in Aleppo. Her instinct was to pick up a camera.
When I filmed the first time, it was just in my mobile phone.
Did you always want to be a journalist?
Yes. Since I was young, I dreamed that maybe I will be a reporter.
So many people were leaving. They were going to a better life somewhere in Europe. Why did you stay?
Actually, it's just my responsibility. I dreamed to have a new Syria, to live in justice and freedom. So I have to work for that.
As crushing East Aleppo became the focus of Assad's war, Wad chronicled the civilian catastrophe. The safest place to live was the hospital itself. For weeks on end, they dare not leave as the bombs landed close. But the hospitals themselves soon became targets. There were many terrifying times.
بنتي وين؟ هون بنتي مع مين؟ أول وين تعال تعال سمان تعال يا قلبي تعال خليها معك ايه خلاص
Wad filmed as ordinary people caught in the horror of war arrived at the emergency ward. None more distressing than three brothers, moments after the warplanes had attacked.
It was a normal day. I took my camera and went to film what's happening in the ER room. From the first time, when you see the brother, you see that he's dead, but you couldn't say that for the little brother. Hamza and the other doctors tried to help him, but there was no hope.
That moment when they were saying goodbye to the little brother is, I think, one of the most upsetting things I've seen on film. I mean, how did you film it?
In that moment, I just looking at the camera, like I'm hiding behind the camera. I'm not there. I'm just focused on tell all the world what's happening in Aleppo. And the worst moment when his mother came. I feel that maybe this mother would be me, and maybe I lost Sama like her. When I finished filming, I sit down on the stairs and began to cry.
The footage that more people have seen than anything is the baby being born. Wad captured the astonishing moments after a heavily pregnant woman was rushed in after being hit by shrapnel. The doctors did an emergency cesarean, but the baby wasn't breathing.
The nurse tried CPR for him, and as I remember, it took a long time. I think about 12 minutes. All the doctors and nurses was crying. He was dead and he came back to the life. I think that this baby is the freedom of Syria.
How close did the bombing get to you?
In the last month, when Sama was about 6 months, many times the hospital was targeted. Sometimes I'm just putting music on my telephone to the maximum.
How did you feel bringing a baby into the world in Aleppo?
A lot of people was talking with us about if you have a baby, you have to get out of Syria. But we decided to have that baby in Aleppo. It was very positive things in a place that all things is death.
During the occasional ceasefires, Wad did get out of the hospital and told some amazing stories of life. Such as Abu Wad, who ran the last garden centre in East Aleppo with his young son.
I met Abu Wad when I was buying some flowers for my house. He was a very nice man. He has a lot of hope.
بيساعد العالم بيروح على نفس المنظر الوردة ولا في أحلى منه. اللي بيشوف الوردة بيتمتع بجمال رب العالمين اللي خلق لنا إياه.
But even this tale of hope in war had a terrible twist.
He was with his son, Ibrahim, when the air forces threw the cluster bombs. I didn't imagine that he will die in his garden. After he died, we were always look at these plants and remember him.
هلا أنت إيش ناوي تعمل؟
والله ما بعرف.
Do you know what happened to his son?
He's okay with his family. They are now in the countryside of Aleppo, and they are okay.
As East Aleppo was retaken by the Syrian government, there were nights Wad thought would be her last. She filmed the confusion and fear as thousands tried to get out alive, with no sense of how she would leave safely herself.
We are waiting with the cars and the civilians and the injuries and their families. Now we are hearing sounds of weapons.
How terrible were those last days?
It was the most bad days, and it was like a horror. Actually, I can't believe that we are now safe and we are okay.
You thought you were going to die, didn't you?
Yes, of course.
As Hamza and his team made sure the injured got out of East Aleppo too, Wad was there until the end.
It's 4 p.m. We are waiting for the evacuation since 6 a.m. in the morning.
Her last pictures in Syria captured her own escape.
It's 2 a.m. after midnight. We are so close to the checkpoint of the regime.
Did you regret staying?
Of course not. We were hoping that maybe the world will see what's happening in Aleppo and say stop to the regime.
Hasn't President Assad won this war?
I think no. Maybe he's take Aleppo, but he's take just some rebels and damaged buildings. He's won this battle, but it's not the end.
You said you wanted to be a journalist as a child. Do you feel that's what you've become?
I'm just a Syrian woman trying to do something for her country. I will continue filming and try to help them and try to show the world what's still happening in Syria.
Wad Al-Khatib, who filmed for Channel 4 News inside Aleppo, talking to me in Turkey.
Amid other developments today, the Justice Secretary, Liz Truss, has let it be known that she is to meet the family of a man who electrocuted himself in prison. She said she will also visit the jail where Dean Saunders died. Last month, an inquest jury concluded the prison was guilty of neglect. In a speech today, the minister said she was going to tackle prison overcrowding through earlier intervention in criminal careers and more effective reform of offenders while they're inside. Our senior Home Affairs correspondent, Simon Israel, has this report.
Liz Truss came with more government promises on rehabilitation to fix prison overcrowding. She's the fourth Conservative Justice Secretary in 6 years to do so, but so far without results. No quick fix, she said again.
I want to see the prison population go down because Her Majesty's Prison and Probation Service has got better at reforming offenders. I want to see it go down because we've got better as a society at intervening earlier before people commit the crimes that lead them to prison.
What she didn't mention was the cauldron of violence or the record number of deaths. 119 killed themselves in jail last year. Dean Saunders was one of them. He electrocuted himself in Chelmsford prison after constant watch was withdrawn. His family's warnings to the jail were ignored. The Ombudsman, the inquest jury, said the entire system for safety was a shambles. I'm just wondering whether you intend to meet any of these families who've done nothing wrong to explain to them how you intend to make custody safer.
I'm actually going to be visiting HMP Chelmsford this week to learn more about that specific case that you mentioned. I will also be meeting with the family. What's very important is the 2,500 extra officers that we are hiring across the prison estate will enable us to have every officer having a caseload of 6 offenders who they can both help turn their lives around but also support them in difficult times. But it's an issue we take very seriously, and we're looking at how better can we support those people in prison.
News she was to meet the Saunders family had not been conveyed to them. Last week, they wrote to her asking for a chance to discuss the issues raised by Dean's death and the prison's neglect.
He wasn't looked at as a person. I see it as he was looked at as a number, another prisoner, and not a life at all. He was our person, he was our family member, and he deserved so much more. He had so much life left to live, and it was just robbed.
They know they can't bring Dean back, but what they want to ensure is that no other family will have to go through what they have suffered. And that is the challenge facing the latest Justice Secretary.
Simon Israel reporting.
After the break, it runs for almost 8 hours and chronicles one of the most high-profile court cases of modern times. But the Oscar-nominated O.J., Made in America, is much more than just a court story. We talk to its creator about what it has to say about race and celebrity in America.
Now, the O.J. Simpson murder trial was an unprecedented cultural event which polarised American opinion. A definitive moment where race, celebrity, media, violence and the criminal justice system all intersected. Now, 2 decades after that famous not guilty verdict, the Emmy Award-winning director Ezra Edelman, who we'll be speaking to in a moment, has been nominated at this year's Oscars for his documentary series O.J. Made in America.
How old were you the first time you were arrested? For any reason?
I did about 46 years.
It's the story people still talk about today. The former American football star turned celebrity O.J. Simpson was famously tried and acquitted for the bloody murder of his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend Ronald Goldman. From the infamous crime scene pictures and the police chase to the courtroom glove moment and the aftermath of the verdict.
Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of...
This documentary delves deep.
When I asked him, I said, we're trying to get black athletes to understand they have a role in the current civil rights movement. His response was, I'm not black, I'm OJ.
But how do you tell something new about a story told countless times? Elderman did more than 70 interviews with friends and protagonists. What stands his work apart from those before it is the untold story of race that it unearths.
OJ was saying, I want to be judged not by the color of my skin. I want to be judged by the content of my character and, most of all, the caliber of my competence.
Told over 8 hours, it could become the first television program to win an Oscar. And Ezra Edelman is with me now. What is it about this story that's 20 years old that still captures people?
I mean, it's pretty much about every sort of meaningful theme, I will say, in American culture, if not, across the world. It's about race and celebrity and class and gender. It's about the criminal justice system. It's at the same time, it's a story about murder and sex. It's got a little bit of everything. I also think there's a sense of, we all did watch that trial. And, when you think even today, most people in America believe OJ to be guilty, and yet we watched this trial where he's acquitted of murder. And so there's this sense of a lack of resolution. And so in some ways, it's still a little bit of a mystery to know exactly what happened that night and to know what is going on inside that guy's head.
I mean, it was a story that's been poured over so many times by television and by print. Did you think there was something there that hadn't been told? I mean, did you know what you were setting out to find?
I mean, I knew what questions I wanted to ask and what things I wanted to explore. I mean, there's a reason why the film is as long as it is. I think that you do need that history and context to reframe that moment in 94 and 95 when so many people watched that trial and in many ways became obsessive about all the wrong things. And so what I sought to do is, by showing you this history of the city of Los Angeles, of the police department, of the black community there, of all of these terrible sort of instances of injustice suffered at the hands of the police, you might enter in watching this trial a second time during the movie with a different emotional understanding of what people brought to bear when they were watching that trial.
I read somewhere that you had said you felt America it almost kidded itself about where it had got to with race by the time of the OJ trial. I mean, do you think it still kids itself about the amount of progress, if you like, that has been made?
I mean, I think it's an evolving concept, and I think one of the things we tried to do in the film is show you that in some ways the more things change, the more they stay the same. And that in some ways in OJ himself, you have this embodiment, theoretically, of racial progress.
And it's misleading.
And it's misleading. Look in terms of the choices that he made, the investment in him by all these people, the irony of that investment in terms of what actually happened with that trial. I think we're always kidding ourselves in matters of race. And so I think in some ways it's always 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
How does that leave you feeling about contemporary events after America's black president, who I presume you would also say is a misleading thing to have happened?
Well, I think that's a good example of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Is it misleading? No, I think it's a very meaningful indication of progress that we got. I don't think in my lifetime I ever believed there would be a black president. And to see that was a wonderful moment. But again, just because there was a black president in the White House doesn't mean that all of a sudden racism didn't exist in America, or that all of a sudden we were in some post-racial society. Quite the opposite, when we look at what's happened in this election.
What's your advice to people about to watch it? It's 7 hours 45. Watch it in one hit?
If you can, sure. I mean, we've been playing in the theaters since last spring in the States. And if you have, I understand it's a big commitment to show up and spend over 8 hours in a theater with the intermissions. So I would love for people to engage. That's how the movie was made. Having said that, knowing that not everyone has that time, if you can watch it in parts, streaming it, watching on your television at home, whatever works for you.
Ezra Edelman, thank you very much indeed, and good luck on Oscars night.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Well, that's it, and that for tonight is Channel 4 News, but We're there at 4+1 at 8 o'clock and online everywhere. That's Channel 4 News. Good evening.
Bye-bye.